Welcome to the NWI.com Political Roundtable for Wednesday, March 21st. I'm Robert Blaszkiewicz, Assistant Managing Editor of the Times. Joining with me today, Doug Ross, Editorial Page Editor of the Times, Times columnist Mark Kiesling. Let's jump right in by talking about last night's Illinois primary, the results of that. We saw Mitt Romney cruise to an easy victory. We saw Jesse Jackson fend off a challenge from Debbie Halverson. Your thoughts on yesterday's results?
Not only did Jackson fend off the challenge, he's beat her with a stick. And
it was, what, 71-29?
I was going to say 70%, but 70, roughly in that area, so roughly 70-30. But it was just, you know, there was no, it wasn't really a contest. So
no, and what was kind of it was not surprising considering the number of people who came out in support of him and you know, left her out in the cold, frankly.
Well, I mean, what's kind of surprising is that more people did not take into consideration the problems he's had with the Blaszkiewicz trial. I mean, he was named as one of the people who supposedly tried to buy his way into President Obama's vacant U.S. Senate seat.
Right.
And even though he's not been charged with anything, you'd think that would leave him with some kind of taint on him. And plus, Debbie Halverson is a legitimate candidate. She's not some kind of
a former congresswoman.
Yeah,
I mean, she's not a straw man up there to be knocked down.
Yeah. Jesse Jackson did have the support of prominent Chicago and Illinois Democrats. Rahm Emanuel,
exactly.
Mayor Quinn came out and endorsed him.
Governor Quinn,
sorry.
So I mean, you know, you could say, you could make a strong case for saying, you know, that he's a product of the machine, and the machine, you know, he print and he came out.
Well, he's always prided himself on not being a product of the machine, and now it's interesting to see that he's
well, he sure had the
sucked into that vortex.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
and now he's going to owe them. He's going to owe Quinn, and not owe Quinn, but I mean, he's, you know, you understand. And he's going to owe Rahm Emanuel, and he's going to owe any number of people who came out and supported him.
Right. Now, what this does mean too is that the Peatone Airport has a much better chance of going forward because he's been a strong advocate for it.
Very strong advocate for the Abraham Lincoln National Airport, as it's tentatively called.
Exactly.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
I you know, I'm not quite sure I understand all the logic behind it, and that you can't get away from the fact that there was there was some racially based voting. You had a black candidate in Jackson versus a white candidate in Halverson, and a lot of the district, because it goes...
Talk about the district.
The district goes up into, well up into Chicago, in a predominantly black area, encompasses a number of suburbs that are predominantly African American, and then kind of scoots down into a less populated area where there are, what do you want to call them, Caucasian Americans, whatever. But the density, the population density.
I'm glad you said population density. No aspersion.
Is African American, and you can't doubt that played some role in it. I mean, that's not to be racist, because I mean, in Chicago,
Well, it's just the basic demographics.
well, in Chicago, it used to be, and it still is, I think, if you could come up with an Irish surname, people actually changed their names. Or if they were Irish and they got married to someone who was Polish, when it came time to vote, they would put, you know, O'Hara or something up there, because they knew people would vote for them because they were Irish.
Yeah.
So it's not racist. It's just a fact that people vote for people that they perceive to be like that.
The other big result last night was Mitt Romney, of course, winning handily, and it looks like he's going to, you know, we'll see whether there's still some question on the presidential side, and when they get to Indiana.
Was that a surprise to you?
I don't think I expected him to win by
I did too.
double digits or more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I didn't. I didn't see that as much.
Illinois was a
surprise.
much more demographically favorable state
To Romney,
Romney. So
Right.
it's not a
So-
surprise, but we'll see how this affects the race going forward and whether there will be, some doubt left when they reach Indiana in May.
May 8th, right.
Right, but the other race that we're obviously keeping an eye on in Indiana, the Republican race, is Senator Lugar, his challenge from State Treasurer Richard Murdoch. Some interesting developments this week in that
Right,
race.
right, and I think this is the hottest race for Senate period in the nation. And what's happening is that the last week the Marion County Election Board ruled that Senator Lugar and his wife were not eligible to vote because they didn't own, because they didn't have the same house that they are registered to vote at. So the senator filed suit, I think it was this morning, and there's been a lot going on, but I'm pretty sure it was this morning,
Well, now-
and challenging the decision.
Well, now, if he's not allowed to vote out of there, is he allowed to run out of there?
Well, there are separate requirements for running for office and for voting. So
Well, I think this could be problematic for him.
it could be
If this stands.
What hurts him is not necessarily the legality of it. I mean, I think he can win this in any reasonable court. What hurts him is politically, because this feeds the idea that there's a disconnect between
Well, the
Senator
Washington
Lugar
insider
and
thing.
Well,
yeah,
you know
exactly.
what? But this is an attack that the Murdoch campaign made from day one of declaring their challenge. When Murdoch, said in his opening announcement that Senator Lugar didn't spend enough time in Indiana eating pork tenderloin sandwiches.
Well, exactly, and basically,
But
they've circled around.
My
It's not-
surprise is that the Lugar campaign hasn't been able to deflect this criticism because, what has Lugar been doing besides being in Indiana? Well, he's been going around the world securing loose nukes. There is something important about doing that.
Well, that's what we let senators for. I mean,
Right,
We
but-
let senators to.
But the Lugar campaign hasn't made that point.
Well,
And-
hasn't successful.
And it's I think it should be concerning for those supporters of Richard Lugar that he hasn't been able to deflect this criticism.
And, frankly, I think this is not, we have to make sure to say that this is not just his opposition in the primary saying this, it's also his Democratic opposition. So, basically he's running for two elections at the same time.
Who would much rather run against Richard Murdoch than
Oh,
Richard
absolutely,
Lugar.
absolutely.
Yeah, and that's something the Republican voters are going to have to consider, is who they put in there is going to have to defeat a Democrat in the general election.
Joe
And-
Donnelly, the
And
current
if they,
second
and if
district
they
congressman.
choose Murdoch, they could have a real problem.
I mean, what the problem is that nobody really knows at this point yet what the Republican base is really believing in
Yeah.
Indiana. I mean, look at the Chrysler bankruptcy. You've got Richard Murdoch, who fought it, and then you've got Dick Lugar, who helped engineer the first Chrysler bailout.
Yeah.
Way back when, Lee Iacocca was, before he did his Back to the Future thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could make a point to say, Lugar could easily make a point to say, look, I helped Chrysler back then, helped them, now, I'm helping save Hoosier jobs. He could.
Well, there are
he
people in
could do
Indiana
things
who
like
have
that.
jobs thanks to that legislation.
Oh, right. But here's the question: how conservative, how sharply ideological versus pragmatic has the Republican Party become? And nobody knows that.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
we don't have the good poll.
We'll find out
We'll
in May.
find out, but I think I think a lot of folks in Indiana are very practical, and I don't know that they're willing to go with a knee-jerk ideology. I think they look at things more.
Right, and frankly, the voter turnout in May is going to make a huge difference. If the Tea Party people, if the ultra-conservative people have mobilized their voters more than the more mainstream Republicans, you're going to see a vastly different outcome.
Yeah. Let's shift gears real quickly. Touch on an issue that
Speaking of Chrysler, shifting gears.
Yeah, speaking of shifting gears,
Thank
some police officers that have had some trouble, both in Porter and Lake County. We saw a Porter County officer whose driving habits have gotten him into trouble, and in Lake County, we see an officer
whose driving habits have gotten him into trouble, and it's just been a bad. Like I said in the comments, it's been a bad week for Lake County Police. First, you have the jail warden resigning after being accused or put on leave for supposedly showing up intoxicated at the scene of a fatality involving one of his officers, in which the defendant was supposedly intoxicated.
We don't know.
No,
there's no way.
And
we'll never know that because
we're never going to know that.
Yeah.
So, but and the second one was a Lake Station city councilman, who's also a Lake County Sheriff's deputy, who, according to the police report, was, quote, highly intoxicated at the time he supposedly, allegedly, slammed his girlfriend's head into the floor. So,
And
the sheriff
he had the oh, go ahead.
Well, the sheriff has been forced to, make one man resign, and he's put the other one. I didn't have this in the column, but what he did with him is he put him in the animal control department, which means he took his gun and his badge. So now he's just watching doggies.
Right. And we should mention that the Lake Station councilman, that officer, also had another. Was the last fall
It was November. Yeah, November of 2011. Had an accident in which he struck a parked car, pushed that into a woman who was waiting for her child to get out of school. And she was injured, had to be taken to the hospital. Now, at that time, they said they administered a blood alcohol test on him, and he was found not to have been drinking. So we're just going to have to accept that. I mean, that's, and that's a distinct possibility. Maybe he wasn't. That's fine. But he was found to be driving without insurance and with an improper license plate on his car.
And that's obviously bad for the department as well as the woman involved.
It obviously wasn't. He was in county uniform at the time,
and it raised some
but
questions.
he was not in a county car at the time.
Yeah.
Unlike the warden, who was in a county car, hit a curb, got out, and fell down. And he was falling down. It wasn't like he'd had a couple too many. He was falling down drunk. So say the officers at the scene.
And then
in Porter County.
In Porter County, Paul Arnold, if I remember right, is his name. He got into so many accidents that he was being sent to the police academy in Plainfield to take the driving course again, and cracked up his car on the way there. So,
something ironic in that.
Oh, wildly ironic. So at this moment, he should be in a hearing right now that could potentially determine his fate on the police department. Doesn't look good, I would say. And,
well, probably not.
and it's a shame to see police getting in trouble, but certainly they're just like everybody else.
Yeah.
There's going to be trouble soon.
Well, and there are consequences.
They are just like they are like everyone else, and they're not like everyone else. In two areas. One, they're not like everybody else, and that there's a brotherhood out there. There was a lot of criticism of the fact that the warden was not tested at the scene to see if he'd been drinking. He was just taken home. Years ago.
And no consequences for not testing.
No, there were no consequences. Well, I mean, there was consequences. He had to resign his job.
But no consequences for the officers who did not
And no,
Exactly.
no consequences for the officers who did not test him, and you know, although the man did lose his job, he does not have a criminal record because there were no charges filed against him.
So,
You know, I mean, what if he didn't? What if he'd struck someone in the way? And how would that look?
Yeah.
And no, I'll say this for Lake Station Police: they did not cover up for one of their county councilmen or
City
city
council.
councilman. I'm sorry. Who is in essence their boss.
right. So good for them.
Yeah, you can't fault them, and they did their job. They did it right.
That's all the time we have this week. We thank you for watching. We'll be back next week with another political roundtable.